Hello, friends. Welcome to Magic, Creativity, and Life. Interesting conversations with interesting people. My name is Thorn Coyle, and I am your host. Thank you for joining me, and thank you to my Patreon supporters for paying for the recording and captioning of this series. Let's dive in. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of Magic, Creativity, and Life. Today, I'm happy to have with me Anthony Morehouse, also known as the Elvish Taylor. Anthony was born in Yorkshire, England, to a family that has been in the clothing trade since at least 1360. He trained in fashion design, herbalism, and aromatherapy, as well as many other skills, running a shop and teaching for many years in a business started with his husband, author Nigel Pearson. After a heart attack in 2012, Anthony refocused on clothing and textile design via his shop, the Elvish Taylor. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. So the thing I always like to ask people is, what are your creative roots? Like, what sort of creativity were you attracted to as a child? And how has that helped you moving forward with your creativity?
I was very much one of those kids on the edge, being the queer kid in the class in the late 60s, 70s, 80s. I was always felt very much on the edge of things. And so, my best friend was my dog. I would spend a lot of time up on the moors or in the woods. I was really, really into Celtic stuff from a very early age. I don't know where that came from until I did a DNA test and found that I was Celtic on both my dad's side and my mum's side. So really interested in sort of that Celtic iconography and Celtic deities and the myths behind Celtic deities. And really, I didn't do a lot of artwork until I went to do my A-levels, which are the qualifications that we do in the UK at 18. And I was studying I was doing English literature, biology and chemistry. And I absolutely hated chemistry. And I really, really wanted to do something creative. And so I asked if I could change to do art. So I had to cram in doing the exam that everybody did previously when they were 16. And I also did A-level textiles as well. And just fell in love with it, really. Just finding that creative buzz gave me a form of not only escapism within myself, but because the art studios in the school that I was were separate and you could use them at like break time and lunchtime and stuff, it meant you could get away from the bullies by going in there and doing art stuff. So that's what I did, and decided that I wanted to go on and do it further. And that's what I did.
That's amazing. I so appreciate this. I hear from a lot of people that, in their childhood, they were different, didn't always fit in, and that retreat may be the wrong word, open exploration into things like mythology and also the natural world is a common thread for a lot of creative people, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's that whole thing about observation as well. When you're creative, because when you're creative, if you're drawing or painting or anything, it's all about observation.
Right.
Because you're observing something to put down, whether it's in your head or you're visually looking at something and then you're transferring that to some other medium. So it's all about observation. And so I think, kids who are on the outside who have that bullying always have a thing about observation. Because they're always looking for danger. So their observational skills seem to be much stronger than people who aren't on the edge. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And that's certainly true for me from my childhood, never knowing when danger or violence was going to erupt.
Yeah.
So I had to become very situationally aware.
Yeah.
And, the way in which that works to our advantage, I think, is that we do have a more open awareness of the world around us, the natural world, the human world, the animal world, the
Yeah.
spirit world. But also, there's a disadvantage in that sometimes we are trying to anticipate things in a way that ends up, we're trying to control our environment,
Yeah.
in ways that aren't as healthy. And so I know for myself, I have had to examine that as well and observe that as well and say, you know what, I'm an adult now, my life is different.
Yeah.
And how do I channel that observation into creativity rather than in trying to control the world around me? So
Yeah.
I can control my art form, right? Instead of trying to control the world. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think it's, as you get older, you learn to breathe into it and be more in the moment. So you observe things, I suppose, in a different way. You observe the minutiae of things as they are happening, not as a warning signal to you.
Yes.
So you watch, like in the spring, we've got a tree outside our house, a great big alder tree, and we watch, the catkins come out, and then the car is covered in golden pollen one morning, and then the next morning all the catkins fall down, and then the leaves start to come out, and you observe those small things.
Yes.
That become important to you.
The small things I often feel are what save me.
Yeah.
Right? It's that connection, the droplet of rain on a leaf,
Yeah.
The spider on a flower.
Yeah.
Right. That form of connection just fills me up and fills my soul and heart and reminds me that life is a beautiful thing. Despite the pain and suffering in the world, there are these jewel-like moments that I can connect with and that then end up feeding my creativity.
Yeah, I agree totally. During COVID, a lot of people were really like, well, I worked all the way through COVID. I absolutely loved lockdown. Because I'm very much an introvert, so being away from people, being in my studio, not having to do all the other stuff and deal with loads of people every day, just meant that I could put that into creativity. And people said, well, how can you do that? And it's like creating something beautiful all the time.
Yes.
And trying to put beauty into the world that sometimes it seems like there isn't a lot of beauty.
Yes. Yes.
And so it's sort of adding to that in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I notice that nature infuses your clothing design. Right?
Hugely, yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit about that, about your relationship to the natural world and how you translate that into clothing.
Sure. In every morning, I have to go on a walk through the woods with the dogs, and down by the river, and just to feel that connection really with nature and with spirit, very much with spirit as well within nature. And I'm constantly looking at things as we walk in the changes, and I'll start off with an idea for something, or it might pop into my head while I'm walking. So like the embroidered silk velvet shawls that I do one about every 3 or 4 weeks. They're quite time intensive. And somebody commissioned an Aphrodite one last week from me. So I was sort of walking through the woods today and thinking about how I was going to come together, thinking about the stories of Aphrodite and looking at the colours around me, and the changes in the landscape, and down by the river, with that sort of water element as well for Aphrodite. It's normally the sea, but we were fairly near the sea, but I wasn't by the sea today. But looking at the colours very much so, and seeing how they're going to work in together. And then when I'm making clothes, I use a lot of florals. I love florals. I think they're really joyous. And I love using them in slightly different ways, maybe taking apart a fabric and putting it back together again. And again, it's very much inspired by what I see in my garden. We've got a lovely garden that Nigel does nearly all the work on. And there's so much there, so much inspiration there. We have, medicinal herbs planted everywhere. So I do quite a lot of shawls that are embroidered with herbs, and even the seasonal ones that I do. So sort of for the 8 festivals, I tend to pick herbs and plants that I see out in the garden at that time,
Right.
and they will be incorporated into the embroideries.
That's beautiful. So how about you have a lot of training in various skills,
Sure, yeah.
but also in various spiritual practices,
Yeah.
including you've trained in Ayurvedic medicine.
Yeah.
You're qualified as an advanced yoga teacher.
Yeah.
You also, are deep into paganism. And I'm wondering, what core spiritual practices do you do on a regular basis?
I do a lot of meditation, and my spiritual practice has changed over the years. So I do less and less formal stuff now, except when I work with my coven, and then it's quite a regular ritual, really. But when I'm working by myself, it's very much of the moment, in the moment. Mm-hmm. So if I'm doing spell work, for example, instead of, having the right colour candles, if I'm very much that sort of person, I go, I've got some oregano, that'll do. And I've got a nightlight there, that'll do for the candle. Because it's the intention that you put into it rather than the
Right.
paraphernalia that, people bring along. And I find that I'm much more, it works and flows much better for me, because I'm not worrying about all the other stuff that's going on. So yeah, a lot of meditation, and again, the walk in the woods in the morning is
Right.
a major part of my spirituality. It's there when I speak to the spirits of the
Right.
of the woods. Every Monday morning, I leave an offering for them in the same place, which is it's almost like a little altar. Which is a tree stump, really. It's been there. I've been using it for so long. It's now less of a tree stump and more of a mound of earth because it's rotted away. So yeah, every Monday morning I leave an offering of bread, milk, and honey, and ask them for blessings for the week, keep us all safe, and healthy, and that everything goes well for the week. Really, I don't tend to ask for huge amounts of things. The older I get, the more I just want peace and happiness.
Yes.
Rather than years ago, I wanted a high flying career, and in fact, I had a high flying career well before we opened the shop. It doesn't bring happiness, though. It didn't bring happiness to me.
Right.
And I've always craved that happiness, and that's sort of the goal, really, in life. Mm-hmm. And simplicity brings that happiness, I think.
That's interesting. We're in a similar age cohort, and I feel similarly that, my ambitions are quieter now.
Yeah.
Happiness, being of service in some way, enjoying life, doing my creative work. I also do a lot of meditation, and I go for daily walks as well.
I love your walks when you take photos of things along the way.
Yes, I post my photos every day. And that's one way for me, creativity is all about connection. And
yeah.
So posting those simple photos every day is one way I'm just trying to connect with people and say, hey, remember, there's beauty in the world here.
Yeah.
But I agree, the simplicity, sometimes I still do elaborate magical workings, but it is that daily heartbeat that's simple. We have a house spirit in our home that when we moved in, we were doing some work on the kitchen, and I was moving the stove out, and I found a little ceramic leprechaun figure, the kind that come in the tea boxes.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, and then I found a tiny silver spoon, and I'm like, clearly this is your little silver spoon.
Yeah.
So I set up a kitchen altar. I have a Balik china cup that I've had for decades that has shamrocks on it. So every day I make myself a cup of tea, and I make the house spirit a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just a way of saying, thank you for this lovely home.
Yeah.
Thank you for the shelter we are offered.
Yeah.
And then out just refilling the bird bath for the animals and birds outside. Those simple kind of offerings that you're talking about, I do as well. They're another heartbeat that's important to me.
We have a similar thing with our house spirits, that they have a shrine in the corner of the dining room, and we feed them on a Saturday evening after we've finished work for the week. It's like a thank you for looking after us for the week, and bring us blessings for the week ahead. And we had a really interesting thing, must be getting on maybe for 20 years ago, where we running your own business. Sometimes it's keeping the wolf from the door and hand to mouth, very much so. And we were really short of money, and I was in the shop. Nigel was at home, and he was cleaning. And he said, "Have you lost a £10 note?" He said, "I've just found a £10 note down the side of the sideboard." I said, "No, I haven't lost one." He goes, "Oh well, there you go." The next week he found a £20 note, and the week after he found a £20 note, and it was £50 exactly that we needed.
Wow.
And we hadn't lost any money there. It had just, the spirits had manifested it there for us.
That reminds me of a favorite story from one of my teachers who has since passed, Cora Anderson. She and her husband Victor were poor. She was raised dirt poor, but there was a time where they were completely out of money, and so Victor asked his son, "Can I use your drum?" His son gave him his drum, so Victor sat with the drum and started praying, and Cora started sweeping the house. And at the time, the house they lived in, the door opened directly out onto the dirt outside.
Yeah.
So she swept the house and kept sweeping in the yard, and swept her way to the corner where there was a bush, and there was money on the bush.
Yeah. It's crazy,
and
isn't it?
It was exactly the amount of money they needed to buy a small amount of food to get the family through for another week.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, that's just about, awareness and connection to what is around us, and that we don't live in a void. We don't live in a vacuum. We don't have to do everything ourselves, right?
Hugely.
That there's help for us if we're open to it. It reminds me of the old Robert Anton Wilson practice of think of quarters, and then you find quarters everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And part of it is just tuning your awareness, which is something I think you touched on earlier, about becoming more aware of the world around us. We're back to the beginning of our conversation. And there's something else there that you touched on about not needing as many elaborate rituals. And the word that came to mind when you spoke of that was integration. You have integrated all your decades of training. And so now they're
every
part
day.
of you. Yeah, they're part of you. You've digested the material.
Yeah.
And so you no longer need as much. It's not that the external stuff wasn't useful.
No, I think that external stuff is useful to get you in the right mind space.
Yes.
Those are what those tools are for, because the magic ultimately comes through you.
Yes.
And so those things are just to get you in the right space.
Right.
And I think particularly with having a meditation practice, so you can switch into that, mind space, that magical head sort of thing.
Yes.
Quite instantaneously.
Yes.
That you no longer need all that other stuff.
Right.
And very much my mum she would never have said she was a magical person. She was really psychic. So that if you got in trouble at school, she would know about it when you got home, and you get told off again, which was annoying sometimes. And she seemed to be able to manifest things when she needed them. And but if you mentioned witchcraft or anything like that, you couldn't go there at all. And she did it very much from herself without loads of equipment around her.
Right.
So I think maybe part of it was picking up from her as well, the way that she worked.
I know that my centering and meditation practice in the morning sets a template for my day. So you're correct. Yeah. Then I always have access to that energy. If I notice myself getting tense because I'm struggling with something in my business, for example, I can just take a breath, drop back down into my center and say, but this isn't that important.
Yeah.
I am not living in an active battleground. It's a business. It's a thing I'm stumbling with in my business right now. And I will get through this. I can find a new way to connect. I can shift my mindset, focus
and
my
I think that's another thing more and more as you get older. Things that you thought were important maybe 10, 20 years ago, you realize now in the whole scheme of things, they're very unimportant.
Yeah.
And you don't need to stress so much about them.
I also think... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the years that I've spent worrying about stuff that never happened.
Right.
I sometimes look at it and think, well, I could have been much more productive if I hadn't spent that time worrying about stuff that never happened.
Yeah.
I think that would be the thing I would tell myself, if I could tell myself when I was 18, don't worry so much. It all works out fine.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I mean, that's hard to hear when you feel in the midst of that strife, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that all of this whole conversation relates back to creativity because, it's the throw the 100 pots theory of creativity, right? You don't work to perfect one pot. You make 100 pots and you learn the clay and you learn the shape and you learn the process. And again, you integrate all of that into muscle memory, touch, how your body reacts, how your mind thinks of things. And so it's similar. The more I write, the easier writing becomes. I see people say, oh, I hate writing. I struggle so much to write. I'm like, wow, I just enjoy writing. It's a pleasure to me.
Do you do it as
part of that is I've integrated it, right?
Yeah. Do you do it as a practice? So you sort of, because when Nigel's writing, he does it from, okay, I'm going to write from 10 till 1 and then I'll have lunch and then I'll write from 2 till 3 and then I'll finish for the day. And so he's very disciplined with that.
It varies for me. When I'm really in the middle of a project, I definitely write every morning.
Yeah.
And I write for at least 2 hours. I do not write all day. That doesn't work for me. Because I have a chronic illness. I have weird brain stuff. But yes, I definitely have that relationship with my writing. And I am very much internally motivated, which helps.
Yeah.
So it's easy for me to just sit down and write. But the other part of it that's a practice, and I do this, I have a monthly creativity sprint with my Patreon supporters. And I always say, let's take a breath, center, and connect with our project.
Yeah.
Right. So I connect with whatever I'm working on, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, whether it's a newsletter or a novel, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And that connection, which only takes a few seconds for me because I've trained for it, gets me into the flow more easily.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, consistency helps with that. Then I'm not starting from zero. People who are inconsistent with creativity, I think, struggle more.
Yeah, I think they do.
They're either waiting for inspiration to strike, which may or may not happen, or they're always starting from zero and having to ramp up from scratch every single time.
Yeah. And I work in my studio. I will do some work in there every single day. Yeah. Days when I'm in the shop, so 2 or 3 days a week when I'm in the shop, I'll be down in my studio at sort of 5:30 in the morning, just maybe scribbling ideas down, looking at different fabrics, just keeping that momentum going. And so that when I go in there with a full day, then I don't have to sort of, turn the engine on and get it going. It's already sort of motoring along and it's already warmed up, ready to go.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Same for me.
Yeah.
So how do you balance, how often do you get a full day in the studio? How do you balance running the shop and fulfilling, having your customers and creating things?
So I am in the shop every Monday, every other Friday, and some Saturdays. The shop is closed on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which is a decision that we made after COVID. And because we decided that we wanted a kinder life, really, and we wanted more time to do creative things. And so we decided we would shut on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And it's worked fine. We don't take any less money. So I'm in my studio Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and every other Friday, and some Saturdays, and Sunday mornings usually. Mm-hmm. And I'll start, I was down there this morning, again at 5:30, I was down there just getting a few ideas together for what I want to do today. Today was totally thrown out, though, because I was waiting for fabric deliveries and they didn't turn up and they're coming tomorrow. So I decided that I was going to go off and see my best friend who lives out in the country, and it was lovely. And so, she had the afternoon off, so we just had a chat and a cup of tea in the garden, and it was nice to have that time off, which is something that I do very rarely. Yeah. I get a bit sort of head down with work and I'm obsessed with it sometimes.
Yeah. I tend to work 7 days a week also. Now, I don't work 7 full days a week. That's my trade-off is some days I'll only work 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
Other days I work a full day.
But I don't really see it as work. It's
right.
I'm really lucky because I love it so much that I see that I'm very lucky that I get paid for doing something that I love.
I feel the same too.
And not many people can say that.
No, it's a blessing, definitely.
Yeah.
So your textiles are both a visual art, a tactile art, a practical art, a craft. Do you have any thoughts about that combination of things?
I'm very much of that idea that that thing that William Morris said, that it needs to be beautiful and useful.
Yeah. And
if it's not those things, then I'm not really interested in creating it. Mm-hmm. So everything that I do, I hope, is beautiful and useful. And I'm very hot as well on sort of environmental stuff. So a lot of the fabrics that I use have a very low environmental footprint. Mm-hmm. So a lot of them are basically stock that would have gone to landfill.
Right.
Fabrics that would have gone to landfill. And so I don't know what it's known as in the States, but here it's known as dead stock. And there are suppliers who will buy, from designers, they will buy ends of rolls and things, and then I buy from them. And like with the cloaks that I do, the wool cloaks, there's very little wastage. What's left over from the cloaks goes into the button scarves. What's left over from them goes into to interline the bags, to give the bags body. And probably from a roll of fabric, there's probably about a teaspoonful of fabric left over by the time I've finished with it all.
That's amazing.
So that all sort of ties together. And I think, pagan spirituality really needs to tie in that environmental awareness. And also the quality of stuff as well. There's so much throwaway fashion that people will wear it once and then throw away because it's so cheap. But it's so bad for the environment. And I just hate that sort of idea that people are just wasting resources. Mm-hmm. So I make things that are going to last for years and years and years. Hopefully they'll last for years and years and years.
I know the button scarf I got from you. I was really happy to find that you had made it of scraps from other projects. That felt really good to me.
I save them up, through the year. I've just started doing button scarves for this winter using the fabrics that I've used probably from Christmas, that have left over in a big bag, and then I go through and, use them again.
So the beautiful and useful thing, that also feels to me, it relates back to some of your childhood activity in my mind, because it harkens back to the way people used to live, right?
Yeah, very much so.
We made baskets, we made homes,
we
made kitchen utensils, right? And those were all beautiful and useful.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me watching the ways in which, I also love, just art for art's sake, but it's interesting for me how much those two things have become divorced in contemporary society. And I think it's to our detriment, because we no longer have the active relationship with the material world we used to have.
Yeah. And I think in a lot of ways it comes down to sexism as well, where a lot of craft things are traditionally seen as, like sewing is traditionally seen as a woman's craft. And you would be, you might not be amazed, but you may be amazed when I'm doing a stall at a show, and I've got all my stuff in front of me, and they say, "Who made this?" And I'll say, "I did," and they go, "Oh," and they don't know how to relate, because surely that's woman's work is sewing, isn't it? And it's like, no, my family have been doing it for the last 700 years. So it's not women's work, it's everybody's work. Everybody in the family was involved in it. And I think very much, if you look at the value of art when it's being sold, if it's a painting by a man, it'll be much more, get a much higher price than if it's a textile by a woman, even though there's probably more skill gone into the textile and more time has gone into it.
Right, like the old lace makers, for example.
Exactly, yeah.
Incredible skill, right?
Yeah.
We even see the differentiation between clothing designers are often men, but the sewers are often women.
Yeah.
Chefs are often men, but cooking is traditionally a women's craft.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And it seems to have that differently perceived value. If you're called a chef, then you can command much more in wages than you can if you call yourself a cook and you're a woman. Right.
Amazing. I once had the privilege at the Parliament of the World's Religions of hearing some Ainu elders speak, and the Ainu are the indigenous peoples in Japan.
Yeah.
And they talked about how, we have a connection with, they're very much animists. So we have a connection with something, and you have to have a connection with that object from its inception, from its first thought, from when it's made, all the way until the end of its life.
Totally, yeah.
Right? Because everything is alive. And what struck me is that's easier to see with a handmade garment or a handmade piece of pottery, because we can sense that active relationship, that ensoulment, if you will, between the creator and the material.
Yeah.
Whereas when things are mass produced, that thread grows more and more tenuous, and it's harder to even comprehend that this mass produced thing has a lifespan. And also, what would happen if the corporation that made it was responsible for it from its inception until the end of its life? Right? They are not responsible until the end of its life. And so we end up with the trash heaps and the climate change and all the other things we're dealing with, right?
Yeah. I'm reading a book at the moment. It's called Less. It's by a guy called Patrick Grant. And he owns a Savile Row tailory, but he also owns a company called Community Clothing, which aims to bring back the clothing industry back into the UK. So all the clothes are made in the UK. And they're really well made. They're at a higher price premium, but they're going to last longer. And in this book, he's saying, he has very few items of clothing because if they're well made, they're going to last for years and years and years. And if you have a Savile Row suit made, which costs several £1,000s, but he said, people bring them back to be altered to fit their children and then their grandchildren.
Right.
Which sort of, again, puts into the whole thing, the amount of love and care and quality and beauty, really, of that whole manufacturing process where everything is made very slowly and with care and attention and hand done.
Yeah, and so then we end up with, wealthy people, middle class to wealthy people, can afford these things that will last forever.
Yeah.
Whereas poorer people cannot, right, and rely on things like fast fashion through no fault of their own.
But then that thing with fast fashion is that if you buy, say, a cheap T-shirt, you maybe can wear it for a couple of months and then you've got to throw it away. So you spent, I don't know, $5 on it.
Right. It's expensive to be poor.
It is expensive to be poor, yeah.
It's expensive to be poor. You end up paying more over time because you don't have the outlay up front. Yeah. And that shift has happened in the last 100 years.
Oh, I would say in the last 40 years.
40 years, you're correct. Yeah. Because I remember as a child, I learned to sew because my mother sewed. Yeah. And we either got our clothing, either my mother made our clothing or we got it secondhand because we were poor. But now it's far more expensive to make your own clothing than it is to buy clothing. Yeah. Right. That has flipped.
Yeah, sure. When I was I used to be a buyer for a big chain of department stores. I used to buy men's formal wear. And this was in the late 80s, early 90s. And the cheapest that you could buy a shirt landed into the UK from Hong Kong was around £5. And now you can buy a shirt in a shop for £3, 40 years later.
Right.
But that's due to slave labour, child labour, exploitation, right the way through the process.
Right.
That we need a massive social change in the way that we look at things and the way that we value things.
We do. And I mean, that's top to bottom in every sector. We need that revaluation. And I'm not sure how we're going to get there.
I'm not either. No.
I mean, it's why, right, you're doing the best you can with your cottage industry. I'm doing the best I can and, trying to take care of people in my local community as best I can. So that's one way, is building stronger communities as much as we are able to, and sharing resources. Right?
And teaching people, I think, is hugely
Teaching
important.
people what sorts of things?
Teaching people crafting skills, how to make clothes, how to sew a button on.
Right.
So many people, when I say that I sew, they go, "Oh, I couldn't even sew a button on," and I'm thinking, somebody needs to just how to basic things like how to sew a button on, how to darn a sock, all those sort of little things. Yeah. To make clothes last longer.
Mm-hmm. I know that there are trends right now, like visible mending. That people are doing. There's also in some cities there are small collectives that you can go and they'll have sewing machines and they will help you mend your garments, things like that.
Yeah, we have those here as well. Yeah.
I think the more we can encourage each other and band together to do that sort of thing, the better. And I just know in my communities, whether it's friends or neighbors or just random people that I connect with, we do a lot of resource sharing. You know, who
Yeah.
has a tall ladder? Okay, you have a tall ladder. Great. Can I borrow your tall ladder? Who has a chainsaw? Who has an air conditioner or an air purifier they don't need anymore? Well, I know this elder over here who needs an air purifier.
Yeah.
Right. So we do a lot more resource sharing. And I think that is also reclaiming basic community that that also was torn asunder, certainly here in the US with the the rise of car culture and suburban culture.
Yeah.
Really disintegrated those sorts of basic human ties that I think a lot of people are hungry to rebuild now.
Yeah. And I don't know what it's like there, but here in the UK, the majority of people don't know who their neighbours are.
It's true here in the US. And I think some people are trying very hard to turn that around.
Yeah.
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 But there's definitely more social distance, you know, like here in the US, it's a problem. Instead of going to talk to your neighbor and saying, hey, can we work this out? People just call the police.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
It's like, you know, you need to move your car. You need to turn down your music. It's like, really? You can't just go talk to your neighbor?
Oh my goodness.
It's terrible. And of course, as you know, that causes a whole other host of problems.
Yeah.
And then when you include systemic racism, we're in big trouble around that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Now, I'm lucky where we live now. We do know our immediate neighbors, and people make sure to look out for each other. Like during lockdown, you know, there was a 90-year-old man on our street, and we were all checking on him.
Yeah.
Do you have groceries? Do you need delivery? Are you okay?
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy where we live right now. We don't have to agree with our neighbors.
No.
We just have to be neighborly, right?
Just be nice. Just be a nice
Yeah.
person. That's the whole thing at the end of the day. Is just be a nice person.
Yeah. So I want to get back to, I'm trying to thread this needle between community and creativity, right?
Yeah.
So you spend a lot of time alone
Yeah.
creating,
Mm-hmm.
and yet the art you create is meant to be worn. It's
Yeah.
meant to be enjoyed. And so how do you feel, or do you feel that builds community and connection with others? How does that work for you?
I think it's through the shop, really, that, people come in and because of the sort of shop that we are, I think in the States you call them metaphysical shops. We have a really good community of people who come into the shop and are interested in that sort of thing, interested in the stuff that I do. They'll give me ideas. They will ask for things to be specially made for them, whether it's something, as small as a tarot bag, up to a wedding dress, for example.
Right.
Or hand fasting dress. And I suppose it's quite an intimate community. And particularly in the town that we live in, actually, everybody knows everybody's business. Particularly if you've got a shop, everybody knows, who you are and what you do. So that community thing comes through that. I suppose also through online social media as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You build a community through that. There are lots more ways of building community now than there used to be. And I have a group of friends who are all creatives, and so we'll chat about things and creative things and ideas. And if somebody gets stuck with an idea, how do you do this? And somebody will say, oh, this is how you do it. And so there's that almost helping out of each other if you get stuck with ideas. So sometimes people will come into me in the shop and go, oh, I'm making this, but I'm a bit stuck on it. How do I do it? So I'll explain to them, how I would do it. Not that the way that I would do it is necessarily the right way, but it's a way of doing it. So there is that as well of helping people out, and particularly in the shop as well, because I'm a herbalist. I work on the old apothecary system, so I don't charge people for consultations. I will just charge them for the price of the herbs, really. Which again is I think it's something everybody should be able to use. Mm-hmm. And there are lots of people who need that facility. And so on days when I'm in the shop, I sort of put my shop head on, and right. Which is different to my creative down the end of the garden head. And so, I can spend, hours talking to these people about their health issues and trying to sort them out. And very much that's part of the community thing that we do as well.
That's part of how you're of service, is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah.
I think we can all find our ways to be of service. Yeah. And even just, sometimes just listening in the shop, for some reason, maybe it's just who we are. We get people come into the shop and tell us their life stories, mm-hmm. and tell us all their problems and things they would never tell anybody else. I had somebody in the shop the other day, and she was in there for about half an hour just telling me about her life and just crying. And I was like, with the tissues, just there as a listening ear. Right.
And that's fine,
Mm-hmm.
That's I think part of that magical thing. It goes back to the wise woman and cunning man, doesn't it? And just being there to help.
It does, and I appreciate that. I appreciate you offering that gift to people in your community. And it also brings up a question that I'm sure some of my listeners will have, which mm-hmm. is balancing. You have years of training in mm-hmm. all these crafts and art forms. You've put in the work. You've got the skills. How do you balance that being of service and giving things away for free and making sure you also get paid?
Yeah.
For your work so that you can have a home and food and a life?
It's very hit and miss, really, the way that I do that. So you can sort of tell when people come in and they want an order for something, if they're going to be difficult. And then you get other people. So I charge them, some other people, say for a handmade shirt, which takes me probably a day and a half to make, I will charge £125, out of which probably £30 to £40 of that is materials. And if you look at the minimum wage, I think it's about £12 an hour at the moment. So I'm not even earning minimum wage on that. And sometimes you get people coming in, that's really expensive. And I say to them, how much do you earn a day? Because this is how much this is going to, how long. So you're getting this really cheaply, and they go, oh, yeah. Suddenly, a bell rings for them. And then there are other people who just really love your work, or really love my work. And I have a connection with them, and I'll have something there that they really love. And I'll just go, here, have this. Just because it makes them happy by giving it to them. But very much it really depends on the person. And I think through years and years of experience of dealing with people, you can tell those people who are trying to take you for a ride and those people who really are lovely people who aren't going to take you for a ride. Does that make sense?
It does. And, I'm just thinking, so you're undercharging.
Yeah, I am undercharging, yeah.
And yet you're still somehow, by grace, able to pay for your home and your food and your shop and your shop rent, right?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And your materials, right?
Yeah.
So how do you think you manage that?
the goddess provides. You know, um, I think I don't know. I mean, we don't have loads of money, but I don't need loads of things.
Yeah.
So as long as I've got enough money to pay the bills at the end of the month,
Yeah.
then I'm happy.
Yes.
You know, you see these people who are squirreling away thousands and thousands of pounds, and they're not happy.
Right.
And I think at the end of the day, one of the things that we should be measuring as a wealth of society is the happiness in society.
I agree. And that's how I feel about my life as well. I don't need much money.
Yeah.
And my wealth comes from the fact that I have a home. I have partnership. I have good food to eat.
Yeah.
You know, I have my walks. I have my creative practice, right? I feel very wealthy, even though I'm not.
Exactly.
Right? I'm not by those other measures.
Yeah.
And I think that gives me a contentment. I have a contentment with what I have and an appreciation for what I have. And that also then feeds back into my creativity, because there's just less tension around my life because of that.
And you're not trying to do things. If I do this, will it sell?
Right, exactly.
And I've found whenever I've done that, you know, oh, this is really popular at the moment, I'm going to do this, and I'll have it forever because my soul's not in it. And I'll do something that's really like, and sometimes I just go, oh, are you sure about that? And I'll go, yeah, I want to do it. And it'll sell straight away.
Yeah.
And I think it's the energy that you put into it, isn't it? That people pick up on the love and the spirit that's in something that you make.
Yeah. I know for myself, as soon as I stopped, when I pivoted towards writing fiction again, as soon as I stopped trying to do marketing and writing the way other people told me I ought to, and just said, no, I just have to do things my way and figure it out, amazingly, my audience found me and I found my audience, and I started making a comfortable living.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the other thing. You know, I see these people who are doing all the things that they think they ought to be doing, and they're miserable. And I'm like, well, some of them aren't even making enough money, right?
Yeah.
And they're still miserable. And then others of them are making probably more than I am. And I'm like, yeah, but I think I'm happier and I'm not working as hard.
Yeah.
Because I'm in the creative flow.
I think it's also that thing that the goddess wants you to be on the right track. And when you get onto the right track, then everything will work out.
May it be so.
Yeah, when you're doing the right things that sing to your heart, then it all comes together.
I think that's a beautiful place to close. Unless you have any final thoughts about creativity.
The only thing I would say is, you know, you do things because you love doing them. And also, be careful who you take criticism from. If you wouldn't take advice from somebody, don't take their criticism.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people out there who will try and destroy you through jealousy or whatever. And it's very easy to take that on board, I think, when you're a creative person, because, you know, going back to what we said about observation right at the beginning, that thing of observation is also picking up on feelings of things. So you pick up on the negative stuff from people as well as the positive stuff, and that can easily throw you out and stop you carrying on.
Yeah. So what I hear from that is stay as true to yourself as you can.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
surround yourself with people who support you and whom you want to support.
Yeah, there was just a thing on the news just before we started talking about the eldest person in the world, this lady, which is 117, I think she's just died today. And they asked her, you know, when she was alive, what keeps you going? And one of the things she said was staying away from negative people.
Mm.
And I think, staying away from that negativity is a very positive thing.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Anthony.
Thank you.
I appreciated the conversation, and thanks to all of our listeners. You can find Anthony Morehouse, the Elvish Tailor, at theelvishtailor.co.uk. And as always, you can find me at thorncoyle.com. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. And if you would like to support this series and future podcasts, please join me at patreon.com/thorncoyle. That's THORNCOYLE. Have a creative and magical day.